I was born and raised in the Netherlands, and I am bicultural. So my father is from Papua, and my mother is Dutch. And my father was living in exile in the Netherlands. He traveled to the Netherlands in 1963 when the government took control over West Papua, and the Dutch colonial power was handed over to Indonesia. Since that time, he was advocating for a free West Papua. And I was born in 1969, the year that the Act of Free Choice was handled in the General Assembly. I was just born in April, and my father went to New York together with Marcus Kashepo and others from the Netherlands to lobby and to make sure that there was enough votes in favor of independence for West Papua. So that was a really high stake at that time. They were, of course, boycotted by the Indonesian government, and they had no access because there were no official members of the UN, and they had difficult access to the UN and to other countries, but they kept on lobbying at the time, and they had a little money. So he told me later that they lived on noodles, and at some point they hadn't even had a dinner, but they kept on working, trying to get those votes in favor of independence. Unfortunately, that didn't work out. So yeah, from the day of birth, I was told about the struggle for independence for West Papua. So when I was young, I was interested in human rights. And of course, also for the advocacy of the right of self-determination for West Papua. And during my school, I did some speeches, and my thesis was about transmigration policy. And I started studying at the University of Leiden international law. And afterwards, I tried to work for NGOs working on human rights. It took some time. I worked also at the district court. Finally, I was registered at the bar. And from 2019, I was also involved in International Lawyers for West Papua. And we started the Dutch branch here in the Netherlands. I worked closely with other lawyers like Jennifer Robinson and Tim Hansen and Melinda Yankee. Oh, sorry, that was 2014, and in 2019 I started my own firm to just focus on human rights, and in particular also the rights of indigenous peoples, more broadly than only West Papua. Indigenous people face the same problems all over the world. Most of the time they have been oppressed by settlers, new settlers. So, as you can see in the US, there were new settlers, but Australia as well, all over the world. And most of the time, their traditional ground is being misused. There are most of the time natural resources which are extracted without their consent, as is happening in West Papua as well. So yeah, that's why I'm really focusing on indigenous rights and environmental law. Also because of the fact that I think it's the key problem for West Papua. Yeah, as you may know, that the biggest gold and copper mine is located in West Papua, and that was in fact the root of the problem. In 1963, it was very well known that there was a big gold mine, gold resources at that time. And I think on both sides, on the Dutch and on Indonesian and the US side, they have profited from these resources. And it was the main cause of not giving West Papuan people their independence at that time. You can see it as well in the Amazon, the indigenous people from the Amazon, but also, of course, in Canada and in North America. In North America, a few years ago, you had the Dakota pipeline, which was supposed to go over sacred grounds of the Indian people, which they have tried to prevent to go over their land, and there was a lot of force used against the indigenous nations. In favor of greed, of course, in favor of those big oil companies, which want to have the shortest cut over the sacred land. And yes, you have seen it as well in Hawaii also, taken over by the US. The Hawaiian wish also to be independent. It was a kingdom. And in Hawaiian, there was also this struggle over a big microscope, which was also to be based on a sacred mountain. That was also some few years ago. So indigenous people face similar problems. And therefore, I think there might also be a similar approach. It's also very important to seek solidarity with indigenous nations and other peoples. It's very important to seek those solidarity in order to tackle those problems and to be sure that you can preserve your culture and identity, and also to freely exercise a right of self-determination, so that you, as the rightful owner of the land and the waters, can have a say in what is happening to those lands. And most indigenous people also live in close harmony with nature. I think the environmental problems that we face today are caused by the fact that the goal of international companies was to gain more and more profits and to grow, and they got out of balance with nature. And indigenous people, most of the time, indigenous people live in balance with their nature and with the environment, and they take only what they need. Most of the time, like also in West Papua, they feel that the earth is sacred. So the Amume tribe and the Komoro tribe that live nearby the Grasberg mountain, they think that the Grasberg mountain is sacred. So the story is that the mountain is the mother, and the mountain and the rivers are sacred. So they wouldn't hurt it as much as they as has been done in the past 6 years. And also in the Western world nowadays, we are more aware of it, that we need the earth, and in some way the earth might also that we're bound to each other. And we need each other. So it's very important that we preserve culture and that we take care of Mother Earth. I think the last decades, this has been ignored by the big companies, oil companies, but also other food companies as well. The destruction caused by big companies is really huge. For instance, Freeport-McMoRan dumps 200,000 tons of tailings per day into the river and into the surroundings of the Grasberg. And that leads up to 166 square kilometers of destruction of productive forest and wetlands. So that's immense, of course. And so in 2018, when Indonesian government obtained a major share in Freeport-McMoRan, they also estimated the damage done by Freeport in the past decades. And it was estimated up to $13 billion. So you can imagine how much damage has been done. And that's only the Freeport mine. The damage done by timber or by palm oil exploitation, that's also really good figured out in reports by Greenpeace Indonesia. So yeah, that's a real shame. I had a student intern, and she wrote a blog about the report, All the Birds Are Gone. Yeah, that's a really sad thing to know, that you don't hear the birds anymore. And in West Papua, of course, is famous for its beauty of nature and for the diversity, and of course the bird of paradise, which is only living in West Papua on the island New Guinea. It's disappearing. I work for the Stop Ecocide campaign. I'm a member of the board of the Stop Ecocide Foundation here in the Netherlands, and I was also a member of the advisory board. Yeah, I was approached earlier by the founder of the Stop Ecocide campaign, Polly Higgins, also known as Lawyer of the Earth. And she was really urging that ecocide should be part of the Rome Statute. And I think it is very important because perpetrators of green crimes should be aware that they can be punished. And all perpetrators, if there wasn't any law that would forbid them to steal or to murder, and that they were and that they could send away to a prison, then those crimes would be perhaps committed more easily. So it's also very important for perpetrators of green crimes, like these big companies, which pollute rivers and just put down toxic waste in the ocean so that the ecological systems are devastated. They should also know that there is a law which says that it's forbidden to do so, and that they can get to prison for that. So that's why it's very important to make ecocide a crime under the Rome Statute or otherwise, as now is happening here in Europe as well. So France and Belgium, they are planning to make ecocide a crime. That's one of the big issues that we here in Europe stumble on, that they think West Papua is far away. So why should we care? And they should care because they care about the Amazon. Are big campaigns about stopping deforestation in the rainforest of the Amazon. But yeah, West Papua is the second largest rainforest after the Amazon. Most of the time, people don't know. They don't know. So that's a lot of work for us, the Free West Papua campaign, and everyone who is working for the cause. That's a real obstacle to win over. It's yeah, it is difficult because you feel sometimes really small. And when you think that your opponents are the Indonesian government and perhaps also the US government, you think, well, what can I do? What can we do? But I always keep going because we should do our very best out here in Europe and the Netherlands to keep knocking on doors and make sure that people get aware about the situation in West Papua, because in West Papua, people still suffer till this very day. People get imprisoned by just raising their voice or raising a flag. And so it's very keep going. And when I talk to people in West Papua and you hear their stories, that keeps me really motivated. And also because of, I must say, because of my father, of course. Unfortunately, he has passed away. I think most people here in the Netherlands feel that way, that we can't stop until the wish of our fathers will be true. And I hope in the near future, but this is something hard to predict. Sometimes I wonder, we're 6 decades further, and there are, of course, a lot of people from other parts of Indonesia have come to live in West Papua. There are also next generations already living in West Papua, and they feel also at home in West Papua. And sometimes you wonder, well, should we keep going, or should we try to improve the situation, that people can live in harmony, and why should you be independent? But until this very day, there is the structure of the racism and marginalization is really it's structural. So it will continue and continue because it's driven by the government and by a special autonomy law, for instance, or by the formal transmigration policy. So it is important that the West Papuan people can truly, freely exercise the right to self-determination. It's really important that they can decide upon their future, upon their land, and upon the use of their land, and that they can preserve their cultural identity as a people. So that's really important. And since 2019, you have seen, as a result of the attack on the student dorm in Surabaya and the Papuan Life Matters protests, which were all peaceful. These were all peaceful protests, but they were answered with real brutal force. And yeah, that was also something that really motivated me to start my own firm and to keep going and to do everything in my own power to contribute to this struggle which Papuan people face. Yeah, it only shows that the Indonesian competent to govern West Papua, and if you need that kind of brutal force and the numbers of military personnel that is deployed in West Papua, is also out of balance. And it almost shows that there is a situation of civil war, you could say, if you need that much of military personnel deployed on the ground and special forces as well. It's not the police that is answering protest, but it's the military. I think that crime of war against civil population. There are clearly provisions in the special autonomy law which violates the rights of the Papuan people. For instance, the right for free, prior, and informed consent is violated. Also, in the new special autonomy law, with the provision to divide Papua in more provinces, it's also a way of divide and create more local governments in order to make it more difficult for the local government to govern their own province. So everything is really centralized. So the government in Jakarta decides upon everything, and it makes those local governments dependent from the approval of the central government in Jakarta. It's also a clear violation of the right of self-determination of the Papuan people, and it's a way of gaining control by the central government in Jakarta. I would like to challenge, and that would be something new in international law, but I would like to challenge if we need a referendum. In my opinion, you have to make a comparison between West Papua on the one side and Papua New Guinea on the other side. It's a whole island, and Papua New Guinea became independent without a referendum. It was decolonized as it at that time should have been. I would like to say that the same goes for West at that time, according to the rules that at that time were applied. And because those rules were violated very clearly, because it is in the report of the UN itself, acts done after the act of free choice are void. So you could say that because of the fact that all those, the act of free choice, of the act of no choice was void, you could say that everything what happened afterwards is also void. And that it should have been done, that the next step should have been taken in the way to independence. And the next step was just to form a national government, to have an election, to choose your own president, or to choose the people who should be in the government. And I think that's something that I would like to challenge, that we need a referendum today. But it's really a unique in the whole decolonization period and all international law that you can see on the right of self-determination with the Western Sahara case and everything. You can see that for instance, for Kanaki and the New Caledonia, they have held referenda. And I think it's not necessary for West Papua because of the unique situation that there was already an act of free choice, and this act of free choice was void. So everything else afterwards is also void. And we should go back to the situation in 1962 when the Dutch should have handled the control of the land to the Papuan people and not to the Indonesian people. At that time, there was also the geopolitical situation of the fear that Indonesia would become communist because of the fact that Sukarno, the first president, was really leaning towards communism. So there was this fear as well. And they wanted to prevent that Indonesia was going to the the Russian camp, as you might see. But I think the most important thing, I think, was the gold reserve that was already known at that time. And the fact that Freeport, McMoran, so the company which up till very recently was the biggest shareholder of the company, of the exploitation of the Grasberg mine and the mines around it, is also owned by the former Minister of Foreign Affairs at that time. Henry Kissinger. And also at the Dutch part, there are signs that they were also have been profiting from this, not only from the mine, but also from other business venues. They have profited from this transfer, and they hoped to continue their good relationship with Indonesia afterwards, and that they could safeguard their business investments. So I think that was a key cause at the time. I think business investments and profits for the future, which, and the Papuan people are the victims of that, the greed of those colonial powers. And I think Indonesia was in fact a colonial power at the time as well. I cannot go in detail, but we're working very hard to keep knocking on doors at the UN and other institutions. Sometimes I lose faith in in the UN. That's why I'm also involved in a new initiative, Congress of Nations and States. The Congress of Nations and States wishes to impair the imbalance between indigenous nations and states. Of course, you have in the UN, you do have a working group on indigenous peoples. But this Congress of Nations and States should create a new organization in which nations and states participate on an equal level with an equal say in matters that concern both nations and states. And also still working on the Stop Ecocide campaign as well. And here in the Netherlands, I'm involved in the Papua Support Foundation, and the umbrella organization, it's cooperating organizations for Papua, which try to advocate for the human rights situation in West Papua and to make the Dutch government aware of what is going on in West Papua. So there's a lot of things going on at the moment. I think the new generations are much more aware of what is going on, and that's a good thing to see. And my daughters as well are really interested in what's going on around the world and in West Papua in particular, and doing their very best to make others aware as well. And we keep planting seeds and we keep knocking on doors, hoping that in the end that there will be a huge support for the people in West Papua. We make sure we will. Together, it must work.